blow this, you know?
Right.
I mean, we got $20,000 in this freaking gyro. But yeah, if we dumped what we found right now, we would be, it'd be bad. It would be bad. So what I just told you is confidential.
Okay, I won't say it.
Not.
And let's not forget, people, every single scientific experiment ever done in the last 500 years has shown no movement, none. And of course, from no movement to no curvature, whoa, what was that? It was a pretty short step. So. Wow, that's interesting. Video, which is also by Malcolm Bowden, who is a physics professor and a PhD, obviously. And we will hear him describe what's going on with Sagnac and also what the modern rebuttal to that is through Wikipedia. And so take a listen to this. I want people to really pay attention to this. Now, a lot of people have seen Malcolm Bowden's work. He is not a flat earther. He is a geocentrist, but he's a physicist and I believe a professor at, or used to be possibly, or maybe he still is a professor at a college. And he's a pretty smart guy, except for he hasn't quite put it together that the Earth is flat and not simply just geocentric. But
Flat Earth Stupidity Exposed by Malcolm Bowden. I uploaded my first YouTube video on geocentricity in October 2011. About 2014, realizing that I was prepared to support unpopular views, I began receiving requests to seriously examine the flat Earth model. I looked at a few YouTube videos and articles, but saw immediately the huge flaws in their so-called evidence. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it was absolute nonsense and a highly developed form of sophistry.
is I want to take everybody back, in history a bit to look at some of the early experiments that were done to detect not only the movement of the Earth, but they can also be readily applied to any curvature in the Earth. And most people have heard of the Michelson-Morley experiment. A lot of people have heard of Airy's failure. A lot of people have heard of Sagnac's experiment, and they may or may not know, what what they're all about. I mean, people have heard of it, but so what I want to do, and the reason I'm going back in history is because I want to bring this forward to a piece of modern technology that we use today, and something that I believe is going to help us prove without a doubt, not only once again that the Earth is not spinning, but that there is no curvature to the Earth either. A lot of people, ask the questions: Can light propagate in a vacuum? Can radio waves propagate in a vacuum? The answer to that question is yes, absolutely they can. It does not require an atmosphere or anything like that for light or radio waves to propagate. However, because light is a wave, and because radio waves are waves, there has to be, by the very definition of what they are, there has to be a medium in which these light waves and radio waves are propagating through. This is the mysterious substance, or whatever you want to call it, called the ether. Now, there are a few different takes on the ether. For example, as I pointed out on our show last week, Jaron, there are people that don't believe that the ether exists still to this day. But rather they call it, a primary element, primary elements. But the bottom line is they're calling it a medium. Okay, now what that medium is obviously a topic for debate, and science clearly doesn't know what it is. I don't think either, but they certainly take advantage of its existence, right? It's kind of like science doesn't really know what electricity is either, but we can harness it, we can calculate it, we can do a lot of things with it. But as far as defining what it actually is, well, that gets a little bit in the murky side. So what we're going to do is we're just going to talk about this ether, whatever it is that waves propagate through, and light propagates through, and radio waves propagate through. And there were several experiments that were done, proving the ether. For example, Airy's failure, which, this experiment in particular, the idea was to determine whether or not the Earth was moving through the ether, or whether the starlight was propagating with the ether coming in from above. So what Airy did is he devised an experiment where he had a telescope, and he basically was able to determine that it was in fact the starlight that was coming in, and it was the stars that were moving, bringing the starlight in to a stationary Earth. Now, I will be the first one to tell people that this subject is hotly up for debate. And frankly, it's the con side to the Aether is a lot of smoke and mirrors logic. And like I said, there's tons of material on it. I'm using Malcolm Bowden's specific information here because he makes it very simple to understand. But so I guess what I could do is I could, play a little bit of this, a minute or two, and you can kind of get an idea of what's going on with it. So the point to this is that the results of this experiment were that the telescope turned out to be stationary, and it was indeed the starlight that was moving in, okay? This was obviously, when Airy did it, it was a replication of the previous professor that had done it. So it has been verified by repeatability. And it's interesting because since then they have tried to come out with a few different explanations, trying to invert this whole idea again and say, no, 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 it was really the Earth that's moving. And this is where it really gets interesting, but you have to go into it and read this and watch other people and the way that they debunk it. It is so pathetic, it's beyond belief, but I'm not going to go into that here. I just want to point this stuff out to you so that it gives you a point to start studying this and researching it. So basically what happened, so Airy's, this was called Airy's failure because essentially it showed that it was indeed the stars moving and not the So around 1887, the Michelson-Morley experiment came about. And by the way, this is an experiment that is documented well by a few people. It's also in the Principle, they talk about it. The Principle movie, they talk about it. And so it went on the premise saying that, the existence of a special medium in space called the ether was well known and accepted by science for hundreds of years. So a hypothesis was made that if a single light beam was split into two light beams, and then each beam was projected at right angles from each other, okay, in this experiment, and one of them was in the directions of the Earth's spin, while the Earth was allegedly moving at 30 kilometers per second. Okay, now let me tell you first of all that 30 kilometers per second is equivalent to 67,000 miles an hour. So the Michelson-Morley experiment was actually not necessarily just trying to look at the rotation of the Earth, but the movement of the Earth around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour, okay, which breaks down to 30 kilometers per second. And the premise is that if the Earth was allegedly moving at 30 kilometers, there would be a phase or a time delay difference in the two beams shown on an interferometer. And what an interferometer basically does is it shows interference patterns in waves. And I won't go into that, in too much detail. I do have a video that kind of explains it a little bit. But they were expecting to see a phase or a time delay difference between the two beams once they were recombined, and that would prove the forward motion of the Earth through the ether. So what happened is the experiment returned what's called a null result, which is just scientific, jargon saying that the velocity of the Earth was none other than 0. Okay. So obviously that was something that once again science couldn't accept, and they really didn't know how to deal with that. So, and it's interesting because I thought about that for a while, and it's like, well, if they were only looking for a forward velocity of 30 kilometers or 67,000 miles per hour, which is the speed of the Earth around the sun, that's odd because they didn't seem to take in all the other fantastic motions. So all I can say is apparently science must have been unaware or simply hadn't made up the velocity of the sun around the solar system yet, or the solar system around the galaxy, or the galaxy around the Great Attractor yet, right? Because obviously those velocities technically should have been much, much, much faster even than 30 kilometers per second. But the bottom line is the velocities returned at 0, even though there were several different angular velocities and linear velocities going on. So basically, after this occurred, the scientism establishment brought forth the explanation from two other very prominent physicists, one guy named Hendrik Lorentz and another guy named George Fitzgerald, okay? And they advanced an idea that was so preposterous, trying to explain the Michelson-Morley experiment. They said that the reason that happened was because the solid steel arm that was pointed in the direction of the Earth's travel, right, 67,000 miles an hour, actually became shorter as it passed through the ether. like because we're moving, we're actually becoming shorter, or we're being contracted. So this farce basically became known as the Lorentz-Fitzgerald contraction, and most physicists just defined it as a physics of desperation. It was pretty much laughed out and discredited. So the scientific community then was in quite a conundrum, because they had to get away from the idea that the Earth was the stationary center of the universe. So then Albert Einstein, old one stone himself, comes in with his solution. And what he did was he created, of course, the theory of special relativity, which mathematically, and only mathematically, abolished the existence of the ether, okay? He had no evidence whatsoever to do that, other than his special relativistic equations, and he did this in around 1905, right? So great, everybody's happy, the Earth's no longer the center of the universe. And then in 1913, Sagnac came out with another experiment that was kind of a variation of the Michelson-Morley experiment, that was intended to prove that the ether did indeed exist, because the idea that Einstein just simply coming out and summarily dismissing it was absurd, and most of the scientific community knew that. So what happened is he did his experiment, and I'm also going to run this for just a couple minutes, about 5 minutes. And believe me, there is a point to all this, guys. I'm getting to it, and I'm trying to hurry through this so that we have. All right. So there you have it. Now, the reason, of course, that we bring this up is because Malcolm isn't wrong about this. The experiment definitely conclusively proves that there is an ether, amongst many others. That it also conclusively proves, in my mind, that Einstein's relativity theory is complete hogwash, and of course a lot of other physicists absolutely believe that as well. Of course, the mainstream still promotes Einstein and his relativity theory, to this day, even though it wasn't his, but we won't go there. In fact, it was not only written by his wife, but it was also proposed several years earlier by a few other scientists, including the equals MC square formula and derivations, but I digress. So Malcolm is correct. Without the existence of the ether, this Sagnac effect could not work, okay? So what was he talking about? He's like, well, airlines are using this Sagnac effect in a piece of equipment that they use to this day. In fact, the ring laser gyro is the very thing that makes an inertial navigation system, an INS, into an inertial reference system, the IRS, which is the updated version. Now, this, of course, takes into consideration the idea of the Schuler tuning, yada, 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 which, of course, is complete and utter nonsense. And they've since replaced that with Honeywell's Adiro unit. And this is something that we are going to cover in detail on a later show, but I don't want to get too technical, during this show. So, in fact, these ring laser gyroscopes absolutely do exist, and they openly state that they work using the Sagnac effect. Well, if the ether didn't exist, then the Sagnac effect couldn't work, right?
Right? Wrong.
The Sagnac system, or the ring laser gyro, is basically in a box, and they are set at 3 different axes. One is for pitch, one is for yaw, and one is for roll, and they all work precisely the same way. Okay, so where am I going with this? Well, the point behind this is that not only does this destroy Einstein's idea of relativity, but it proves Sagnac, and it also makes a gyroscope that does not have the limitations that are brought about by mechanical binding at the gimbal attachments. Okay, so one of the biggest complaints that the ball earthers are coming back with about the standard gyroscope experiments is they're saying that the precision gyroscopes that we're using today in the 21st century have too much of a mechanical binding effect to be able to detect the 0.000695 revolutions per minute of the Earth, right?
That's
Which,
absurd.
of course, that is absurd. It's absurd, absolutely. And because remember, 170 years ago, Foucault supposedly did this with his crappy gyroscope, and he reported precession, thus, quote unquote, proving that the Earth was rotating. Well, great. So, so what we have here now is we have something that is working with no moving parts. It's simply by a ring of light, which means that the sensitivity factor is literally unlimited. It's totally sensitive. And in fact, that is reflected by the Adiro calibration instructions that are brought out by Honeywell. Okay, Honeywell basically says, yeah, when you're calibrating this, you can't be moving. They don't even want passengers to be loading on the airplane because it's that sensitive, right? Little vibrations or loading luggage, anything like that. So what that tells us then is that in modern day aircraft, we are putting these ring laser gyros in virtually all of the commercial airliners, and every one of them has the capability, just by sitting on the runway or sitting on the tarmac, of detecting the motion of the Earth. Okay, so one would then say, well, then why don't you just do that, set them on the runway? Well, they're not going to detect any precession sitting on the runway, and the reason that they will tell you that it won't detect any precession is because the Adiro unit, once calibrated, is then, and this is openly stated in the Honeywell training videos, and I will cover this in depth, but they're saying that because of the Adiro system, it is compensating for that precession via its own mechanism of Schuler tuning, if you will, right? So it's supposedly compensating for it, and that you never will see anything while it's sitting on the plane. Well, that's all fine and dandy. So what I started doing is I started looking for, the possibility of purchasing a ring laser gyro. And lo and behold, I found some things that you can actually get these things out of the Adiro unit, away from Adiro unit where this compensation is supposedly taking place. And if we can get one of these and, do like what Rob Durham said, basically just fire it up and let it sit there, it will tell us straight up whether or not the Earth is moving. Now, the interesting thing about this is if you go and you look at these ring laser gyros, a lot of people are out there doing home brews of them, but they're not testing them using any sort of interference a fringe pattern, right? They're doing it and they're saying, oh, look, you're seeing a slight voltage change here, which is absolutely conclusively telling you that the rotation of the Earth is happening. Of course, there's a lot of other explanations for that. Again, I will debunk those in a future explanation. But so what I'm thinking is when I was looking around for these things, I was able to find them from anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool, if we didn't have, if we couldn't find one, somewhere like at an avionics shop where we could just go in and videotape a demonstration, if we actually purchased one of these separate and away from, an Adiro unit, which. The point is that we have devices in existence today that prove Einstein wrong, and the fact that this is just glossed over blows me away. Right? How is this happening? It makes no sense that they're allowing this to happen. And frankly, I think it'd be really cool if we were able to crowdfund one. If we were unable to do this, I'm going to get in touch with some people at DIA. I believe that Wolfie 6020 is definitely no troll. I think that he is also very interested, although brainwashed. I think he's interested in finding the truth. And he has, being a corporate ATP, he has some really, really spectacular contacts that he may be able to help us out. And in fact, he has been extremely willing to do all kinds of experiments, even to the point of offering up 10 grand to financing a flight to Antarctica, where he and I would actually pilot the craft. Of course, I don't really feel like getting shot down, but it's a great idea. But I think we can probably prove that anyway. So I honestly believe that he could be a terrific asset to us. With what we're seeing and the logic that we're seeing. So he and I made some definite strides forward with the acknowledgement. I hadn't brought it up yet. Hang on just a second. Here it is right here, I think. Yes, it is. All right. So speaking of that Jonah guy, that was the guy that everybody was referring to, or that, excuse me, Mike Helmick was referring to. He sent this a long time ago to me, and I looked it over, and it's pretty comical, actually. But and mind you, the date on this was in 2010, right? 7 years ago. Measuring the Earth's rotation rate using a low-cost MEMS gyroscope. And so they go through and they talk about how, the procedure to do it. They talk about the limitations of the MEMS gyroscopes and also the accelerometers. But they're saying that absolutely it is possible, even with these 7-year-old technology gyroscopes and accelerometers, right? And so he goes through this whole procedure, talks about the theory, and what's really interesting is when you get down here, right down to actual tests that they went into, and let me find the right place here. The thing that's really funny about this is they show, here it is right here. So they show the Earth rate estimation. Okay, the true rate is the green line, which is flatlined, right? Meaning nothing. Their estimated rate, which is the red line, they're saying, well, here's what it should have looked like, but this is what it actually was. There was no rotation. But yet this whole paper is 100% about how the MEMS accelerometers are sensitive enough to detect the rotation of the Earth. Well, isn't it funny that even their own data shows that that's nonsense, because they had a projected outcome and then they had a real outcome, and the real outcome showed nothing. But this was done by Tampere University Technology in Finland, right? So here we have a document that was supplied by, Jonah the idiot, and is telling me, well, see, here it is, it's already been done, the whole 9 yards. But obviously he didn't read the document. But what it does give us is, here's a mainstream admission from a major university that these MEMS gyroscopes, even as far back as 7 years ago, are perfectly capable of detecting the rotation of the Earth. What a surprise. Okay, just wanted to throw that out there. But so, kudos to...
I think a frickin' kite would be able to detect the rotation of the Earth, but that's just me.
Well, I know. But see, everything we come up with, when we use a gyro, So what we really need to do is stick more to the things that we know that we can prove and or debunk. And this, of course, brings us all back to exactly where we have been going, trying to measure curvature, whether or not we have to compensate, in aircraft while we're flying for this curvature, yada, yada, yada. I mean, it goes back to a vicious circle over and over and over again. And that's why, I've said so many times that, to me, the one thing that busts it all wide open is the gyroscope. And that simply cannot be debunked in any way, shape, or form. I was absolutely blown away at how deceptive, Vsauce was being. And he was saying, yeah, Foucault detected it, but we know today that Foucault was a liar, because that precision cannot be detected, even with 21st century technology. Recently, we carried out an experiment to test the rotation to the Earth. If the Earth is spinning at one rotation every 24 hours, that means that every hour it has to turn 15 degrees. And if the gyroscope is mounted anywhere on Earth, it's going to drift. In today's 21st century navigation systems, they're using what's called a ring laser gyroscope. It is extremely precise. If we could simply get one of these ring laser gyroscopes, we would be able to prove once and for all that there is no rotation to the Earth. One of the people in the community actually purchased one for $20,000. At a conference in Raleigh, we want to have proof there's no curvature. And if we can do that, it's game over. But the rotation is not looking good at this point. We don't want to blow this,
Right.
And we've got $20,000 in this freaking gyro. But yeah, if we dumped what we found right now, it'd be bad. It would be bad. So what I just told you is confidential.
Okay, I won't say it.
Not. But what we found is when we turned on that gyroscope, we found that we were picking up a drift, a 15 degree per hour drift. Now, Obviously, we were taken aback by that. Wow, that's kind of a problem, right? We obviously were not willing to accept that, and so we started looking for ways to disprove that it was actually registering the motion of the Earth and that it in fact was registering the motion of the sky. So the next thing that we set out to do was to encase the fiber optic gyro in what's called a zero Gauss chamber to see if we could actually shield the energies being generated by the heaven. And we were unsuccessful with that, unfortunately. So the next thing that we're going to try is encasing the entire apparatus in bismuth. If everything works well, I'd like to release it at the conference.
If there's not
So now I'm going to share something with you that we have been working on with our own experiments with the fiber optic gyro. And remember, I've told you that the fiber optic gyro in principle operates precisely the same way. So the difference between our fiber optic gyro and these apparatuses basically 100 years ago is that our fiber optic gyro has far, far better detectors as far as being able to establish any velocity, either rotational or direct. Okay, so when we got our gyro, and by the way, this gyro is an extremely mainstream gyro. It's used by the Defense Department. It cost us around $20,000 for this device. And we have run several tests with it, and I'm going to reveal one of them to you, and others we're going to be revealing at a later time. So what did we detect with our fiber optic gyro when we plugged it in and turned it on? Well, like many other people that registered, that use these things, we also detected a roughly 15 degree per hour rotation, okay, or a 1 revolution per day, okay, measurement. Now, what is it that's measuring? Was it the Earth's rotation? No, absolutely not. Why? Because we already know that Airy had concluded conclusively that it is the actual ether, the medium that the light is propagating through, that is rotating around us. Okay, so why did we detect that 1 revolution per day? Because the fiber optic gyro operates principally in a virtually identical manner as both the Sagnac and the Michelson-Morley apparatus, but differs from the Michelson-Morley apparatus in that the fiber optic gyro and the ring laser gyro both are specifically measuring angular motion of the ether versus the perpendicular motion of the ether in the Michelson-Morley apparatus that it was designed to measure, meaning that instead of being set up to measure direct velocities like the sun going around the Earth going around the sun, it was more designed to measure rotation. However, this is the same thing that was going on here, and they were picking up this 1 to 10 kilometer per second rotation. Well, that's crazy. So basically, it was a null result, but it was still in part picking up this rotational energy instead of this perpendicular energy as it went through space. Now, a lot of people are going to say, oh my God, Globebusters just proved the rotation of the Earth. No, I don't think so. Because first of all, if this finding would have been conclusive in proving the Earth's rotation 100 years ago, Einstein and other heliocentric proponents would have claimed this 100 years ago. But they didn't. Instead, they chose to simply abolish the ether and replace it with relativity. And of course, the reason for that, like I just explained, is that, then they would have to focus in on why they were getting these 1 to 10 kilometers per second. And again, this comes from the rotational energy going across a very small portion of the circular apparatus that they were using. All right. So, unfortunately, modern technology using this very same ethereal Sagnac effect is being used today in modern ring laser gyros and fiber optic gyros, so they chose not to make much clamor about it. All right. So now they're coming out and they're kind of saying, well, yeah, this is absolute proof that the Earth is spinning. But let me kind of employ an aphorism about the detection of the 1 to 10 kilometer speed in the Michelson-Morley experiment. And that is, even a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So as the ether is turning 1 revolution per day, it would partially align to the axis. Now think about this, guys. It would partially align to the axis of each arm during the rotation, culminating in a maximum alignment that yielded only a 10 kilometer per second rotation at the optimal alignment, and down to a 1 kilometer per second rotation at perpendicular alignments. The detector arms aligned at right angles, measuring a circular rotational ether. Okay, so here's the rub on this. The ring laser gyros and fiber optic gyros are far more sensitive instruments than any of their prototypes used over a century ago, because of much better sensitivity of the phase discriminators used to measure the interference patterns. Okay, so as a result of this increased sensitivity, we would expect to see the fiber optic gyro to indicate a rotational speed of not only the 1,038 miles per hour, 15 degrees per hour, but in keeping with the Michelson-Morley experiment, where they were getting this basically 30% error, 1 to 30% error, we would expect to see the perpendicular speeds between 2,236 miles per hour and 22,369 miles per hour, which would translate to a detected rotational speed oscillating between 25.7 and 107 degrees per hour. But that wasn't the case. Approximately 15 degrees per hour was the only rotation detected by the fiber optic gyro. So what does this prove? This proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that both it is the ether rotating at approximately 15 degrees per hour around the Earth, and that there is zero motion of the Earth around the Sun. Okay, so if you guys are understanding this, remember, everybody that is measuring this with their fiber optic gyros, they're looking at that 15 degrees per hour and say, yep, there it is. That proves that the Earth is rotating. But what they're completely failing to take into consideration is all the other motions that are in play here that are considerably faster than the 1,038 mile per hour rotation. For example, the 66,000 or 67,000 mile per hour velocity around the Sun around the Milky Way around the Great Attractor. In other words, all of these things are well within the sensitivity thresholds of these ring laser gyros. yet the only thing they measure is the 15 degrees per hour rotation, and that does change, by the way, by the latitude, and that's calculated by the cosine of the latitude times, oh shit, I forgot. Anyway, it's calculable, okay? But the bottom line is no other motion is detected. And that, of course, is the one thing that the mainstream and all these people saying, oh, well, these fiber optic gyros and these ring laser gyros are conclusively measuring the rotation of the Earth, wrong again. Our own experiments tell us straight up that the ether is rotating around the Earth and that there is no tangential velocity around the sun. Period. End of story. But we're going to say that the reason that they didn't, supposedly, of course, now remember Foucault, said that he did register these changes, but that would have been an extreme sensitivity case issue, which of course we've never been able to replicate today. But yes, there would still, the mechanical gyros would theoretically react the same way to these these changes in inertia, right? But they didn't. In fact, we can't even get the mechanical gyros to show any rotation of the Earth. Why? Because they are inertially based devices. The ring laser gyro and the fiber optic gyros are not inertially based devices. They are actually measuring the etheric field that light is traveling through, and therefore they are orders of magnitude more sensitive, right? Yes, that's why we were able to measure the ethereal rotation, the rotation of the energetic, the dielectric rotation, or the counterspatial rotation that is coming energetically from the heavens above. It is indeed the heavens above that are rotating at this roughly 15 degree per hour rotation rate. Magnetism in and of itself is a pretty remarkable thing, as is electricity. And electricity has always been related to the divine anyway, just by the prefix of L, right? What does L mean? That's another name for God, right? Electricity, elect, in other words, high order things. Construct, okay? In other words, whenever you have an electromagnetic rotation, you also have what's called a dielectric rotation. And the dielectric rotation is always at 90 degree perpendicular axis from every single point from the EM field itself. So you have this toroidal EM field, and no matter where you take a measurement or a sample of it, there will always be a 90 degree dielectric rotation. This is called counter space, okay? Now this is where, a lot of people have a hard time getting their head around this, and this is covered in electrical engineering, but it's basically it's basically this kind of, I guess you could look at it as kind of an alternate dimension, if you will. I guess I'm just too far gone.
Interesting.
So let's get into the topic of this video, which is looking at a prominent flat earther who has made claims in the past that he holds a commercial pilot's license with a multi-engine rating. Some of you may be familiar with Globebusters, and in particular Bob Knodel. This is his profile on the Flat Earth International Conference website, and currently it simply states that he has experience as a pilot. But just a few days ago, what it listed here was quite different, and we'll have a look at that shortly. So occasionally I will make a video, upload it to my channel, and then decide to keep it unlisted because I want to redo the video and make it more efficient. And this is one example. It is called Footage from the Flight to Europe and a Question for Bob. It was uploaded on November the 4th, 2018. It was never made public, but I still have it on my channel, and I'm glad I did, because it shows clear proof that Globebusters have deleted one of their videos, and also that the FEIC profile has been edited in the last few days. So to avoid any confusion, I just want to give you a summary of what I'm showing in this video. 1 week ago, the homepage video on Globebusters was Flat Earth, Mathematics and Pilots and Planes, oh my. In that video, Bob states very clearly that he is a commercial pilot. Also, a week ago, on the FEIC profile for Bob Knodel, it stated that he holds a commercial pilot license with a multi-engine rating. And I have proof of that in this video that was uploaded on the 4th of November. And I will play that footage shortly. The FAA website lists Robert Knodel as being a private pilot only. He doesn't hold a commercial license, and he has a third-class medical, which is not suitable for a commercial pilot's license, and it was last conducted in November 1978. Now, I thought I'd have a bit of fun with Bob, so in recent days, I intentionally slipped a few comments on various channels that I might make a video about this, and today I noticed that the video is not visible on Globebusters. It appears that they have removed it. Additionally, the FEIC profile has been changed and no longer shows Bob holding a commercial multi-engine rating. So even though Globebusters appear to have removed that video, it was mirrored by other channels, and I managed to find a copy of it here, and I will link to this video in the description below. So now let's take a look at part of the video I uploaded on the 4th of November, where we can clearly hear Bob state that he is a commercial pilot, and I also show that the FEIC profile for Bob on the 4th of November stated that he was a commercial multi-engine rated pilot. And I also demonstrate on the FAA website his record, which proves that he is only a private pilot and has a single engine rating only. So let's play the footage. Let's hear what Bob has to say.
Also in the United States. So he essentially holds a dual ATP rating. Well, if you're going to look at pilot certifications and compare them to college degrees, then Wolfie would have the PhD of pilot's licenses. As compared to myself, I would have, as a commercial pilot, would be more akin to a master's degree.
So we heard him say very clearly that he is a commercial pilot. So at the time I took Bob at his word, and for several years I have believed that he is in fact a commercial pilot. But recently, looking at the FAA Airman Registry and putting Bob's name in, it shows that he is not a commercial pilot. It shows a private pilot license only, single engine aircraft only, and the medical class is a third class medical that was last conducted in November 1978, so 40 years ago. I'm not going to accuse you of anything, Bob, but are you a commercial pilot, or have you been exaggerating your qualifications as a pilot? Because this is telling me you don't have a multi-engine rating, and this is telling me you are not actually a commercial pilot. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to explain yourself. And a very significant point is this third class medical, which is unsuitable for a commercial pilot. Here is a summary of the medical standards required by the FAA, and as you can see, a third class medical is only for private pilots. To be a commercial pilot or an airline transport pilot, you need a second class and a first class medical. I hold a first class medical, and I have to do a medical every 6 months to keep that valid. So Bob, if you're only a private pilot, why do you tell people that you are a commercial pilot, and why does your profile here list you as a commercial instrument multi-engine licensed pilot when your FAA record shows you as a private single engine only pilot? I'm just asking. So there you have it. On the 4th of November, the homepage of Globebusters featured this video with Bob stating he's a commercial pilot. Today, I cannot find this video anywhere on his channel. On the 4th of November, the FEIC profile for Bob Knodel listed him as having a commercial pilot's license with a multi-engine rating. Today, it simply states his experience as a pilot. As we saw, the FAA record for Bob Knodel proves that he is only an amateur private pilot with a single engine rating, and the last time he did a medical was 40 years ago. So clearly, if Bob actually was a commercial pilot, there would be no reason to remove this video from the Globebusters channel. There would also be no reason to edit his profile on the FEIC website, removing any reference to him being a commercial pilot. I think it's pretty obvious, Bob, you have been exaggerating your qualifications as a pilot. You are just an amateur, and the last time you did a medical was 40 years ago, and that certainly explains why you have always been afraid to discuss flight planning with me, because you know I would destroy you in 30 seconds. So I think you need to explain yourself, Bob, if not to me, certainly to those people who paid good money to listen to you speak. Why have you claimed to be a commercial pilot with a multi-engine rating when the FAA record shows you as a private pilot, single engine only?
Mr. Bob Knodel of Globebusters and FE Corps has been continually misrepresenting himself and committing fraud. He is a liar, and he is a fraudster and a con man. And his misrepresenting of who he is needs to stop. Mr. Bob Knodel, you are in violation of Colorado law. I pointed this out to you before. Colorado law, Article 25, regarding surveyors, engineers, and architects, Part 1 of engineers, this is 12-25-105. Unlawful practice, penalties, and enforcement. First part of the provision, it is unlawful for any individual to hold himself or herself out to the public as a professional engineer unless such individual has complied with the provisions contained in this Part 1. You may have, but you've never earned a degree. which would allow you to call yourself an engineer, let alone a professional engineer.